Good evening. My name is Ashley Fick. I am the Civic Engagement Librarian at Johnson County Library. Thank you for attending today's program, Civics 101, Libraries and the Freedom to Read. Our goal is to make civics education and the functioning of government at all levels more accessible to the general public. And then before we begin, I just have a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions for the panel throughout the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A engagement tool. We'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the session. A recorded version of this webcast will be available in the next 2 weeks and can be accessed via the library's YouTube channel. I'd like to go ahead and welcome our panel so we can get right into the discussion. First, we have Lacey Griffin. She is the Johnson County Library Collection Development Manager. Rebecca Markham Parker, Kansas City Public Schools Librarian. Deborah Stoppello, Kansas City Public Library's Director of Library Collections, and Terry Chartier, excuse me. She is the Ottawa Library Executive Director. And with that, we're going to jump right into our discussion questions. And I am going to start with Lacey. Lacey, can you explain to us what is censorship, what isn't censorship, and what might it look like in a library?
All right. So yeah, censorship has been a very hot topic in the news and all over the place lately. And there's some kind of misconceptions with it. And sometimes I feel people are a little bit on the fence of what exactly it means. So censorship, as a broad definition, is the suppression of speech, public communication, and other information from people. And it can come in many different forms. So it could be like the exclusion of a book or not selecting a book for a different library, but it can also be things like stickers or signs or special collections removed from the rest of the collection that make access to the information or the item difficult to have. Some types of censorship are complete, like you can't get away from them a little bit. If you think about how you split up a library, you can see like a youth section or a children's section as being some type of censorship because you've decided like, okay, those materials are for this audience and they're going to go over in this corner. That's kind of like hit or miss. And one of the things that we always talk about in the library is when we are deciding on different collections, we're deciding to split things up, we're deciding what to buy because budgets can be an access, a barrier to access. Space can be a barrier to access. Availability, what's even being published, can be a barrier to access. The way that we look at it to make sure that we're not falling into a definition of censorship is we always try to make those make those decisions on like what is the most accessible answer for that. What if we're going to have to make a barrier, like a decision because of a budget restraint, or if we're going to like have a children's section, those ideas are being implemented in a way that makes it more accessible for everybody. It's easier to find those children's books. We're going to get as many viewpoints as we can within the budget limits, and we're going to try to make those limitations and those decisions in a way that is broadening and making accessibility better. And you really fall into that censorship when you're suppressing it and you're trying to keep people from the information or the item.
And Lacey, I'm going to tag onto that question. What is a challenge?
So a challenge, yes. It's funny, I've been talking to some library staff about this. Right now, everybody is like listening to the word challenge and thinking of it almost like in Harry Potter, where there's like he who shall not be named, and like you couldn't say Voldemort's name because it was scary or something like that. Challenge kind of for some reason in this like new little world that we're living in is scary, and a lot of people hide from it. It's okay. It's a complete normal part of our democratic process. Basically what happens is when we're building a collection and things like that, we want there to be an outlet for somebody to question something that's in the library, or question something that they're not exactly sure if it's in the right place or if it needs to be moved. And so that's kind of where challenges have come. The spirit of a challenge is just being able to like have that two-way relationship with a government entity where you can ask questions and figure out why things are. It's been a little bit used differently. There's been some I hate to use the word abuse, but there's been some different reasons for people to challenge materials lately, which haven't really fallen in the whole spirit of why it exists. But that doesn't make it itself, a challenge itself, a bad thing.
Okay. And then Terry, what's the process when a book is challenged, and does it vary if you receive numerous challenges?
So our process is we always encourage staff, if somebody wants to challenge an item, to send them up to my office or make an appointment with me. And I will not meet with somebody by myself. I require another staff member to set in on that discussion with the patron. And we basically go over how libraries feel about censorship. We talk about intellectual freedom. We talk about the freedom to read statement and the freedom to view statement. And after we have that whole discussion with them, we usually ask them also if they've read the entire item that they want to challenge, and encourage them to do that before they challenge it. If they still want to go ahead and fill out a reconsideration form, we provide them with that form. We also provide them with the intellectual freedom information, the freedom to read statement, and the freedom to view statement. And once they submit that form to us, then it's my responsibility as the director to make the decision or assign staff to help make that decision. And we read the item in its entirety to make that decision. We tell them that we will take 45 to 60 days to reply to that reconsideration form. And if we have numerous items challenged, which we did have a year ago, we set that length of time to reply longer and tell them that they can expect an answer in 45 to 60 days. Now, the really important thing that we need to make clear to those challengers is that that item will remain on our shelves available for individuals to check out. It doesn't get removed because it's been challenged. It's still available. So we try to get the process done as quickly as possible and get an answer to them. If after we give them an answer, they're not happy with our answer, they do have the right to challenge it and appeal our decision to our board. And they have up to 3 weeks to challenge that decision. After that, if they do challenge it to the board's responsibility is simply to look at our policies and clarify that staff followed the policies as set by the board.
So, Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit about how it might vary in a school library? Are there different considerations? How does the process vary?
Well, our selection process might be a little bit different in that we're looking at a certain age level that we're targeting as far as our purchases go. But otherwise, for reconsideration, we work with the director of our department usually, and we have a reconsideration form that the person who is with the concern fills out. Part of ours is that we ask the person to have read the whole item, and we ask some really detailed questions about what they've read. Then we have a group that convenes, people from the district level, the building principal, the librarian, and staff members, and then that team makes a decision. And also the book stays on the shelf until the challenge has been fully addressed. Quite a bit similar.
And this question's for Deborah, but also if anyone wants to answer it, I think it's a really interesting one. Has there ever been a time when you've removed or relocated a book on your shelves?
So we have relocated, and we've reclassified in terms of the Dewey Decimal subject. So if you all may recall, a few years ago, the Dr. Seuss books were, some of the language and depictions were brought into question, and the publishing and the Seuss family, the foundation, decided not to publish those. and to not put out any new editions. And we talked about it internally, and we have the books, but we relocated them into a different section of the library. We have some closed stacks for our children's books, simply for space reasons. So this goes back to that censorship versus choice and accessibility that Lacey was talking about, because we have lots and lots of children's books. We have lots and lots of Dr. Seuss books, and we just chose, and there was a level of censorship that was brought to our attention, but we chose to relocate them into the closed stacks, along with many, many other older books that are there simply for space reasons. So they are accessible, but they have to be asked for. So that's one, and it was based on, publisher decisions and the Seuss family decisions, and that's what led us to that. And then we also looked at a book, Irreversible Damage, about teen transsexuals, and it's very, very controversial. And we looked at the Dewey Decimal classification, the subject classification, very carefully to make sure that we had it correctly, because is it medical? Is it political? Is it simply social issues? And so we analyzed it as a group very carefully and came up with a Dewey Decimal classification that we deemed appropriate for what the topic, the subject area of the book was. Yes, we have, but part of it is just being very, very careful about our decisions and where things go, and providing that broader access in some cases, but in other cases, allowing access, but making tough decisions based on the context of the situation. So those are two instances. I think those are the only that I'm aware of since I've been here, but those have happened relatively recently. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on that because Debbie said that so well. Yeah, that's what we run into a lot, right? Is where we're going to like draw those lines and things like that. I've had to move some books before, and one of the things that we do when we purchase books is we're usually purchasing them before they are published. So we're taking the data that we're getting from our vendors, we're taking the data that we're getting from the publisher, we're getting the data that we're getting from marketing firms, because we'll also look and see if a book is being very well marketed and is going to be on the Today Show, it's probably going to need a few copies. And so we'll take all that data ahead of time to be able to place items where they're suggested to be. And sometimes when they're really popular titles that have a whole bunch of professional reviews before they're already published, do have that marketing push, their metadata will be very, solid. And then there's times where it's not. And as soon as the book comes in, you're just like, oh, this is definitely not a picture book. This is now an adult graphic. And so there's things like that you have to catch, and you have to double check once they come in and things. And then sometimes too, you'll get a request for reconsideration, and you'll be like, you're right, all the characters in this book are all in high school, that all these themes are in high school. This definitely should have been in the teen collection as opposed to over in the children's department. So a lot of those things, we're not making those decisions in a bubble. For the most part, we're trying to use as many professional guides, instructions, reviews, and things that are actually in the publishing field to be able to make those. And there was once, this is my funny removal story. I did have to take a book and remove it from the library because it was published illegally. The publisher had lost the rights to the book to the author. The author sued to get the rights to her book back after they had already pre-published, pre-sold them, published them, created them into a book, and sent them out to the libraries. We'll usually sometimes we'll get items, a couple of weeks before the release date, and we have to hold them and wait till that Tuesday when it's release date and send it out. So this is a publication that was, it was a nonfiction book, adult book, and they were all excited. And so we already had the copies and things. And then the day after release, when they were already in the library systems, I got an email from the author with a letter from her lawyer saying that those are now stolen goods, because she had won the rights back the day before. And so I had to run that through our legal department to make sure that it was real. And then we pulled all the books off, and we found that she had already sold it to another publisher. And so then we had to reorder the books that weren't stolen. So that was a weird day that I've never run across before, but yeah.
And I want to follow up on something Lacey said. So we work for different library systems and are in different communities. We have different local communities. So we are looking at our local community when we are making those assessments that Lacey was talking about. So if a book comes in and we see, based on all that metadata, our professional judgment, maybe we know the author, things like that. And then we look at it, and our decision actually might be different from other people on this panel because our community who we're serving is different. So that's taken into consideration too.
And then Lacey, we've been talking a lot about collection development policies. What is a collection development policy? Another thing my colleague pointed out to me, we keep talking about request for reconsideration form. What is that?
So we kind of use challenges and requests for reconsideration forms synonymously. And so, yes, for people outside the library world, they're like, what are you talking about? So if you've heard me talk about a challenge, my definition of a challenge is an item that I received a request for reconsideration form for me to reconsider and look at that item. And those forms can be filled out to want to have an item moved, to have an item in a different collection, or to have an item completely out of the collection. Most of the ones I get are usually just to move an item. I get very few for a complete removal. That form is within the collection development policy. So most libraries, should be all libraries, have a collection development policy, which is a policy that guides libraries on how they select and deselect items for their collection. And it's also like there to inform the public on the principles of that library and how they're making those decisions. Because as Debbie said, and as Rebecca knows too, being in a school library, it's our missions and visions are all different, and our purposes for how we are serving the public and our mission and vision statements are all different too. We're all in the spirit of libraries. We all want intellectual freedom and to provide as much access to information as possible, but how we serve up that access can differ between library systems. So in our collection development policy, it'll talk about what we use to make selections for the collection and what we keep and what we don't keep. And so one of those things is it says in our collection development policy that we don't have textbooks. And one of the reasons we don't have textbooks is because if you start looking at all the different colleges and all the different textbooks in the world, there are some very expensive textbooks out there. And it might not be worth it for us to spend that money and put it and have that shelf space for that very huge volume or multi-volumes for a very niche area, or if it's just a request from one individual. So one of the things we talk about a lot is access doesn't always mean ownership. And so we can provide access to that material through our interlibrary loan and borrowing it from maybe a science library, university library, school library, maybe KCMO, maybe Debbie's library, that has a whole more patronage and a bigger community that is using that item, and they'll let us borrow it for a little bit and then send it back. We do that with international. There's a whole thing where we really can't purchase things internationally. There's international publishing laws and things. And so we'll interlibrary loan things from, there's a library in Hertfordshire, UK that we actually spend a lot of time sending stuff back and forth to. And so, yeah, those are the things. And in a collection development policy, that policy's purpose is to state what kind of things, why you're making the selections, what kind of collection you're keeping, why you're keeping that collection, and what do you do when something's not in that collection. And also, it should have a section about weeding, or we call deselection, removing something from the library too, because space, I would love to have I'm going to use Harry Potter again. It's 2 Harry Potters for me. I don't know. I would love to have the tent that expands into that big old huge house and it just keeps going forever, but it looks like a tiny tent. Libraries have a finite amount of space. And so we right now for our 14 buildings order about 100,000 items a year to come in. So we need about 100,000 items to come out as well from those 14 buildings, because there's no room. If you just keep doing that, in 10 years, you have 1 million new items and now you have doubled the collection, but your buildings are the same size they were before. So there's all of those things should be lined out in that policy. And honestly, in a collection development department, we use that every single day to be able to determine and check ourselves and be like, all right, are we following policy? Is this what we're supposed to keep? If we're not if we're not buying this, how else are we providing access to it? Those type of things. It keeps you in line that way.
So Lacey, when mentioning textbooks, made me think, is there anything in any of your collection development policies that maybe are unique to your community or unique to your library? I just want to toss it out if anybody can think of something off the top of their head. They didn't know I was going to ask those questions. They may not pop into their head.
We have special collections. So our Missouri Valley Special Collection is Missouri and regional. We have a performing music set collections that local chamber music and symphonies use. So there is something in our collection development policy about focusing on special collections. Absolutely.
I don't know how many of you have it, but we do have microfilm that has our Ottawa Herald all the way back to the first day it was ever published, where patrons can come in and get on our microfilm machines and look up old information that they might be looking for genealogy. Of course, we've got Kansas history books in our collection.
And we also don't have textbooks, so if you want to interlibrary loan that from us, you can't.
We do I was gonna say, we do have some things. So in our collection development policy, it says that we can add special collections as they are supported through programming and things like that. So we do have a little open-ended one. Our collection development policy is renewed every 2 years, which feels like a long time until you're having to look at the whole policy every 12 months for the next 24 months. And then you're like, I feel like I'm renewing this all the time. But what's really nice with that is we're able to support anything in programming that we would like to do between those 24 months of renewals. And since it is a living document, renew every 2 years, we can add in things and take them out as well. So Arduino kits are one of the, not Arduino kits, we used to call them Arduino kits. It's just Makerspace kits now, because they don't have to be from the Arduino company. They can be from anything. But we do a lot of Makerspace kits right now that we're supporting with the Makerspace that can be checked out, and you can build little circuits and things like that.
And to follow up, so, and every library is different and approaches things differently. So our collection development policy is more broad than Johnson County's, but our plan, which is kind of like the administrative rules. So the policy is the law, and then the plan is the administrative rules. That is the document that is constantly updated and as things change and grow for us. So yeah, everybody does it a little differently, but to have that foundational document is the key.
Deborah, we've touched on this a little bit, but could you really tease out for us what's the difference between selection and censorship?
I love this question. It's really hard. And this is where I say it depends. And I think Lacey, because I'm not going to give you a straight answer, and Lacey touched on it. So I think Lacey gave a great definition of censorship. It's limiting access, right? The selection is choices, and again, budget, space, who your audience is, who our patron base is, our community, who are we serving? We don't buy textbooks for a variety of reasons. We don't buy, we might buy a limited amount of titles in a certain subject area simply because that is not what our patrons, their interests and needs are based on our ongoing assessments and things. But yes, it could be a very gray area. So to check ourselves, are we doing this because it's controversial? Are we making this decision not to buy or to buy, right? Because it's controversial. If we ask that and we get a yes, then we have to go deeper, because that is not acceptable. That's where we look to check our own bias, particularly in these times. It is very, very easy to have self-censorship, because times can be scary for librarians and teachers and things. And so we always have to, and we do this we have a little thing we do where it's like, okay, why am I hesitating? And we check in with each other. What is the reason I'm hesitating about this title? Is it the topic? Am I scared to buy it because it's controversial and there might be pushback? And then we go from there. So just on a very basic level, am I not buying it because it's controversial and there might be problems? That to me is kind of the crux. And then all those other things about space. Now, having said that, if I have 2 books and I have plenty of subject coverage, I've spent all I should in this one area, and I have 2 books that are dealing with the same thing, and all things being equal, but maybe one thing might have controversy. Which one do I go for? That's where I'm not going to give you an answer, because which one do I go for, right? All things being equal, but this one might be a little controversial. They're really tough choices. If anyone can help me answer that, please do. It doesn't come up a lot, but those are the types of things we think about. Absolutely. I'm not kidding. This is not about every single day. And it's tiring, right? Because we used to just kind of do this as a matter of course. Now you have to stop and really think about it. Why am I making this choice?
Am I providing access? Why or why not? Sometimes
Yes.
why not is fine, but you always got to stop and ask.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we do that circle up all the time too, where we'll turn around all of our chairs and we're like, all right, I'm stuck on this one thing. Why am I stuck? We at Johnson County, we also, so we'll start formats are that way as well. Because if you think about a title can be in print, large print, CD audio, ebook, and e-audio. So you're buying a book 5 different times if you're putting it in every single format. So each title is times 5, right? And so in limited budgets, you can't have every single thing in every single format. You just don't have enough money for that. And so the way that we prioritize formats is we'll start with the hardback print copy first, and that's our #1 priority when we get it in. And the reason we do that is because of access. Again, we're like asking like, okay, so why is that the format we're going to look at the heaviest? Well, the only thing that's the access to the barrier of that is getting to the library and literacy. Like that's it. There's no other access barrier if you have a hard print, a print book. Once it's in your hands, as long as you can read, which literacy is a big barrier, but once you can read, it's there, right? So that's where we'll start with that format. And then from there, we look at the other formats and then buy appropriately after that one. And what's interesting in that is CD audio used to be the top format for an audiobook, above e-audio, electronic, like through Libby. And that is now flipped, because with cell phones and access, there are more people who have access to the e-audio book than who have CD players. And so that is a weird one where just since I've been working at the library, that one has flipped over.
Okay. Rebecca, can you talk a little bit about how schools balance age-appropriate content against censorship? And really anybody after Rebecca, I think, if you want to speak to that, please do.
Well, I always start with, well, there are several things I'm thinking about when I order, including representing all areas of society as far as people and schools of thought. Also, I look at professional reviews to see how that book has been regarded by experts. And I really take a hard look at what age levels the book is appropriate for. And I think in the past, as a high school librarian, I wouldn't have hesitated to order too many things that were adult. But now I really have to look at that more carefully because of the scrutiny as far as library collections go. But those are the big considerations. And even still, it's hard to find sometimes voices that of minority cultures, because that can just be really challenging. It's interesting, about 4 years ago, the number of books with white protagonists decreased, but it wasn't other areas that increased. It was the number of animal protagonists that increased, that saw that increase. And so a lot of my challenge is really finding a lot of books to represent all voices in the library.
We experience that too. And every publishing industry survey that comes out shows that things have not improved. It is still run by a very homogenous group, and that the publishing, what's coming out, is still very skewed towards white. Yeah.
That also happens with like different subject areas and things like that as well, and different viewpoints, even in nonfiction. We're bound by what's published, and unfortunately, it's not as diverse and not as many voices represented as we would like it to be. And so I've often had people ask, well, I need this one book in this one subject. And you're like, there's nothing that's been printed in the last 10 years in that subject. So we would love to have one too. And so sometimes we'll run into barriers that way.
And if you think about it, so we have our collection development policy, and we talked about professional reviews and relying on, and when people provide these titles that might have, broaden those subjects, they're not in the mainstream, so they're not getting recognized by the industry review journals and the other things. So it's tough that they may not meet some of their criteria of our collection development policies, because it's always been, it has to fall within certain, norms. And so that makes it difficult. So that's another thing why we have to review the policy or the plan regularly, in order to be able to incorporate different voices, simply because our policies were written from a very, very narrow perspective.
And touching on a little bit of what you guys are saying, we had a lot of arguments when we were getting all of our challenges a year ago about not having enough Christian books or conservative books for children. And a lot of discussion about judges that were conservative. We didn't have a lot of books on them. Well, again, we looked and there just weren't a lot of books wrote about all of those individuals. So it definitely helped us find new avenues to find more Christian books than where we were currently looking. But finding the judge books weren't easy at all.
I always forget to unmute myself. You would think I would know by now. I want to jump to one of our audience questions earlier than I said, because it goes along with some of the things we've been talking about. Does anyone have experience with elected officials who control your budget? But I'm going to expand it to, maybe they don't control your budget, pressuring your libraries to carry or not carry specific titles. And I want to also broaden that, just any form of what a library might consider censorship.
Well, about a year ago, Senate Bill 775 in Missouri brought into play a lot of concerns for Missouri librarians, and it prohibits sexual images, not words, in books. And so that became a really, and is still a big issue in Missouri. And a lot of states have had similar legislation.
And to follow up on the Missouri side, the Secretary of State rule that impacts public libraries for age appropriateness, the placement of materials that uses vague language, provocative vague language, that makes it difficult for us to when are we not putting some, if we create a display that a child has to walk by in order to get to the children's section and it has teen materials on it, is that run afoul of age appropriateness, right? So we've had to interpret this in ways to be able to operate essentially and go about our business. But yeah, that's been very, very difficult for us having these new Secretary of State rules.
And I think this circles back into our conversation about having solid policies and procedures in place. Elected officials get elected, and so they rotate through, and they change from time to time. And so opinions change from time to time, political views change from time to time, whether they support the library, don't support the library, it's just a revolving door, right? And so if you have a really good solid policy, doesn't matter who is in that seat or who has those opinions or who has those questions or thoughts, your policy would be able to handle and answer all of those. And so it's really important. I think what's interesting is that I know a lot in like rural areas and things like that, they had policies they hadn't looked at in a long time and things. And then as we got into this new political climate, a lot of them like immediately, blew off the dust and looked to see what it was and made sure everything was tight. Because that's really going to be the document, and that's really going to be what you refer to in those situations. It doesn't necessarily change with who's in there. Your policy is still the same. You're still trying to get, free access to information and have that fundamental intellectual freedom right to be able to have all the viewpoints so you can make your own decisions and your own thoughts and your own beliefs and have all the information you need for it. Those fundamentals then, as long as they're in that policy, can be pretty solid and can help you walk through a lot of those conversations.
What types of challenges are we seeing in libraries? We hear a lot like there's so many challenges going on. It's in the news. I see it in the news every day. Are we seeing patterns? Is it different than past times? And how is it different? And how is it the same?
A lot of school challenges that are happening now are minority voices and other non-majority groups in society. And it's really painful to watch because the students who are different than those voices need to read that, and the students who to share that voice need that too. It can really offer a validation to them. Sometimes the best way we have to explore our world is through the books that we can access. And so it really grieves me to see that these are the books being challenged.
A majority of our reconsidered books in the past were mostly adult. And so just within the last 2 years, it has been more child focused. So they're not all children's materials. Like there's a couple challenges where I've actually had both sides of the political aisle. I've had both sides of belief systems, but I would say probably the biggest difference I've had in the last 2 years, as opposed to like the 10 years before then, is the age level of the material being challenged.
For us, we have very few, knock wood, and it is actually off from the left, challenging, and it comes from people who have been harmed, right, from vulnerable populations, and feel threatened. And so it's completely understandable, but we uphold intellectual freedom for everyone. And so we walk through that process and keep things on the shelf and just make sure they're in the correct place based on the content, and have good conversations with people. Part of the challenge is it may never get to a reconsideration forum. Staff are empowered to have that discussion right there on the floor. We do it a little differently. It doesn't escalate to our director. But the staff themselves, if they feel comfortable, every situation is different. They can either talk to it, refer them to the branch manager, and then if a reconsideration form is necessary. The one thing that we have had, though, a lot of, and that doesn't come through me, is our events, our programming. And I know that our youth and family engagement staff are experiencing a lot of phone calls, for example, from out of state, actually, about some of our programming.
We had challenges last fall, and we had 15 challenges on 14 books, and they were all LGBTQ plus books. So even though the individuals who did the challenges claimed that that's not what they were doing, it was obvious that that's what they were challenging. And so after we took care of all those items, we haven't had anything challenged since.
So Deborah said something that I think was interesting. Does it matter if a challenge comes from outside of the state, or what about the tax base? Do you take that into consideration?
We changed our policy, so and administrative procedures. So in the past, no, it didn't matter, but we changed that very specifically to be within our library district, our taxing district. We changed the number of in total, but also current challenges you could do. We looked at things very carefully and changed them all because no, you cannot be outside of our taxing district and go through that process. You can certainly say something to us, right? We'll talk with you, but it is not, you're not eligible for a formal challenge or reconsideration.
That's exactly what we did. We updated our policy. You have to be a card holder and you have to live in our taxing authority.
We debated that quite a bit, trying to decide where we were going to land on that. We have not changed it yet as to locking down to tax base or library card holder. We will still accept a challenge from anywhere. And that's probably the biggest difference I've seen nationwide in the most recent time, is a more organized push, a more organizations working together to challenge certain titles in multiple libraries, not just in their own community. And so it's a very valid question. And there's many people who are looking at that in their collection development policies, which are to support the community in which you serve. And so where do we make that balance where an outside influence like that can then question what you're serving to your community?
We've even gone to the language of, it can't be an obvious mass-produced type of challenge. It has the very specific questions that need to be in. It's a participatory experience. We've gone through, as you can see, we go through quite a bit before we decide something is appropriate and relevant for our communities. And if someone is questioning that, that's a participatory experience, right? And as Lacey started, challenges are great. That's democracy in action and having that conversation. But we expect that participation going both ways. It's a two-way conversation, and there's responsibility, because removing something from an individual, removing something access to an entire community is a big deal. And so we take that very, very seriously.
I know a lot of school districts were finding that they had a lot of vocal people who weren't even within their school district boundaries. And so now districts are even looking at having certain policies for people who live within their district, and also certain challenges can't be made if the person in question doesn't have a child in the school that has the book in question. So I think there's a lot to be said for looking at where these are coming from. And I know a lot of reconsideration forms are including asking the person what organization they represent, because sometimes you're getting someone who's acting, who is wanting to present themselves as an individual, but they're really pretty enmeshed in a group situation. And so that's something I know a lot of districts have added to their policies, to their reconsideration.
And then I have one last question that I wrote. So if the audience is submitting questions, we do have one sitting out there that I'll get to. We talked about intellectual freedom and the freedom to read, but what does that ultimately come down to? Does somebody feel like they can distill that in a, I know it's a very complex topic.
Let me try. So basically, oops, I just covered you all up. That's not what I wanted. Intellectual freedom is the freedom to be able, for an individual, to be able to have access to information and viewpoints from all sides and from all places in the world, so that they are able to digest all of those freely and to come up with their own thoughts and own opinions and own ideas. And it's one of the foundations for democracy, is that, you know, in America, we hold very close to us, to our chest, to our hearts, the ability to be able to have our own beliefs and our own ideas. And by restricting that access, you are not letting people be able to have the full story, to be able, that they are seeking, to be able to access everything for their own system. That's, I think, it in a nutshell.
But I want to tie this, because I don't think people, intellectual freedom is a great term, right? It's freedom of speech. It's our First Amendment constitutional right. Freedom of speech is not only the right to express, but as Lacey said, it's the right to access. So we all believe in the First Amendment. I think that's something we all agree on, both left and right. And so understanding that that is intellectual freedom is freedom of speech. And it's not just expression, but it's access.
What's interesting too, and what I kind of like sit back and watch to see what will happen, is, you know, the First Amendment is your right by birth. You have the First Amendment, and it even says at birth you have these rights. So there is an interesting push and pull too then of what we're seeing, especially on the school side with Rebecca and things like that, or where there's different things that are saying, you know, age appropriateness and having very vague, interesting definitions, is that that does kind of bump up against that. And so I don't know what the future holds with that as well, but yeah, intellectual freedom, First Amendment, the right not just also to express yourself, but also to receive anything that you're asking for, both of those are protected.
Okay. We have a question from our audience. Where do you look for books to review and shelve or purchase?
I can take some of that. So there's all kinds of library things out there. The industry has provided. There are industry journals. So we have professional journals that are for adult, teen, and juvenile, and there are professional librarians who review books. I mean, because if you think about it, if Lacey and I'm buying 70,000 new books a year, that's just physical. We have 10 locations, you know, and that we have to find all those somewhere. And there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of books being published every year. So we have to be able to filter through that. So there are industry journals, library industry journals. There are also other ways. We have distributors who, if you know, we want everything published between these dates with this level of expected retail. It's called demand, popularity. How popular is it going to be in the retail market? And there are ways to get us those in a form that we can go through them and not have to look at hundreds of thousands. Now, that being said, that goes back to that mainstream issue, right? Very white, heteronormative. You're not going to. So one of the things that we also do is go out and try to uncover other areas. We make connections with our local bookshops, and there's, blog. In our profession, there are people out there doing that work for us. We are doing that work, and we share. So it's just a big process of trying to uncover all of these gems that,
Yeah, there are blogs that we'll follow as well. Self-publishing has blown up in the last 5 years. It's very popular. There's new self-publishing awards that you can get and things like that as well. So not only with like what the vendor will give us, or what different marketing streams from the publishers will receive, but we'll also look at blogs, different websites, fan sites. There's different genre fan sites too. So there's different
TikTok, Book Talk, that has
Book
blown
Talk.
up.
Yeah, Book Talk's been a big one. I mean, Colleen Hoover, oof.
Let them know.
So many of those are reprints, by the way. Those are not all new books.
That's true. Let them know what Book Talk is for anybody that might not know. I don't think everybody.
It's like TikTok. It's a social media plug that different fans and authors and publishers will go on and do little like videos about their books and things like that. So as you get into that, the algorithms will like send you the different genres that you like the most of. And when they become very viral and super popular and have a lot of views, they start going up to the top of the feed. And so those are the ones you kind of want to catch.
My husband's a teacher, and all the kids are very into Book Talk.
That has to be like the oldest person version of that. I'm sure my 15-year-old would be like, what are you talking about? But I think I explained it well.
I think so.
We also have staff members that will look at our collection and make suggestions to our collection development people, saying, well, we need more of this in our collection, or you missed, getting this book. And we have community members that can make suggestions, and we contact our life care center here in town and ask them for ideas. So we definitely ask our community for information and want to make sure that we're fulfilling what they want to read also.
We do that as well. We've made that, again, participate, I shouldn't even try that word this late at night, collaboration with our community on what titles to buy. And we have found that we are getting incredibly diverse titles through that process. And there's an ownership of the collection. There's an engagement with the collection. So it goes both ways. That's very, very fulfilling for the community and us to have that engagement.
I think we were looking the other day, we had to pull numbers for a report, and we get about 3,000 to 5,000 suggestions for purchases a year. So all of those are all individually looked at by each of the selectors and taken care of as well. So thousands of suggestions.
Yeah, another thing we'll do is our teen librarian will contact the high school and the middle school and just ask them if they're going to have a certain book on their reading list for the year. And we'll check we're members of a consortium, so we'll check and see how many are in the system. And if there's not very many, we will order extra ones to make sure that they have plenty for their classes.
So if it's James, I was gonna say, if it's James Patterson, that's kind of easy. It's all that other stuff, right, that we have to do a lot of legwork.
I had a question come through. What strategies do you use in collection development to check your own biases?
That's a great question. So we always talk about, as a department, we have kind of a sign up where it's leave your bias at the door. So we try to remind ourselves about it every single day, and we all know we have them. So we're very, very upfront, the whole team, about, okay, I know I have this one. I know that I don't normally buy this one. And so that's when what Debbie was talking about, that circle up and like, okay, why am I feeling worried about this? Am I making a bad decision? And we'll talk about it. What's really interesting too is the group normally, if something is pushing that button, the default is to get it. So where it comes to like biases, especially when I was selecting, I probably bought more of the things that I was like, that was a trigger to me that I needed to buy it. So there's that in there as well.
I make sure I talk to students and staff who read more of maybe a topic than I do, so that I'm really getting some good information that way too. And there's a librarian, well, there's lots of librarians that I talk to all the time. You find out what different librarians really favor in their own reading, and then they're really good resources to find out what you really need to have in that for that genre. And I make sure I have multiple ways that students and staff and others can recommend books, so that I know there's a lot of eyes on the collection, so that it really serves our community.
We make it it is a safe space to have these discussions, to express, why am I feeling this way? Why is this controversial? To have disagreements. You can have disagreements in my department. We talk through it. And, to ask, am I being biased? Am I being self-censored? What's going on? So it just has to be a really open, creative, self-aware, right? And aware of others' biases, because we work closely, but to be able to talk about it openly without worry about repercussions, in a sense. You're not going to get attacked, or if you express something, your discomfort about something, we talk it through.
I always talk about how it's like the new car syndrome, right? So if it's something in your, like, you just bought a brand new car and then you're driving around this like brand new Jeep Cherokee, and then you're seeing all the Jeep Cherokees on the road for the first time, and you're just like, wow, when did everyone else buy a Jeep Cherokee? Well, it didn't change. There were the same amount of Jeep Cherokees on the road except for yours beforehand. And so we talk about that a lot too, where it's like, okay, if that's your favorite actually, I have a selector who probably could spend more in her favorite genre, but she's worried about overspending in her favorite genre. So we actually have to make sure that she is spending in her favorite genre. So there's that kind of thing. But yeah, we talk about the new car syndrome all the time. If you are, a frontline staff member, you're like, my library checks out the most mystery books of any other library. And then you look at the stats and it's not true. It's just because you love mystery and you just noticed those were the only ones that were going past your desk. So
I'm going to use the new car syndrome language. Thank you.
Okay. I think that we're pretty close to time, so I'm going to close it out. And I just really want to thank all of our panelists for taking time out of your evening. I very greatly appreciate it. We're very excited to have this up on our website, or not our website, on our YouTube. Excuse me. Our web team is going to be like, what? So thank you so much. We appreciated sharing all of your expertise today. I learned something, and I think probably all of our attendees did as well. If you are an attendee and you're interested in other civic and community-centered programming, check out our Community Matters programming, and Catherine's going to drop that in the chat for you right now, like magic. So you're welcome to attend any of those. And I would like to also thank you for taking time out of your evening and learning more about libraries and how we function. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to make everyone disappear.